Stanley Elkin is a member of the American Academy and Institute of Arts and Letters. His books include The Living End, Criers and Kibitzers, The Franchiser, and 2 nominees for the National Book Award, Searches and Seizures, and The Dick Gibson Show. His anthology, Stanley Elkin's Greatest Hits, was given the Southern Review Prize for the best collection of short fiction in 1980. His 8th work of fiction, George Mills, is a novel about 1,000 years in a line of losers, all named George Mills, beginning with a stable boy in the First Crusade to a modern-day George, a furniture mover of the dispossessed in St. Louis. Stanley Elkin is a professor of English at Washington University in St. Louis. He walks with the aid of a cane. The reading and interview you're about to hear were recorded at the author's hotel room on a visit to New York City. And now, Stanley Elkin reading from George Mills.
Then one morning, Mills refused to mount, refused to advance further. "They've betrayed us," he said. He meant the horses, and he laughed bitterly. "So this is horseland." "There is no horseland," his superior said. "Get on your beast, Mills." "Why should I? You said yourself there's no law here, no kings or treasury. We ride each other's horses, share and share alike. We discuss lunch, decide dinner, choose the blue fruit or the primrose. Why should I? You said yourself, exactly. I said, I did. Listen to me, my Mills. I'm your superior, just as that barbarian we saw was mine. Learn this, Mills. There are distinctions between men. Humanity is dealt out like cards. There is natural suzerainty like the face value on coins. Men have their place, even here, where we are now, at large, outside of place, beyond it, out of bounds and offside, loosened from the territorial limits, they do. It's no accident that Guillalum is the youngest son, for all it appears so. No more accident that you are the horseshit man. It isn't luck of the draw, but the brick walls of some secret sovereign architecture that makes us so. It's as simple as the scorn in my voice when I talk to you like this, as natural as the italics my kind use and your kind don't. Now do as I tell you. Get on your horse. Get on your horse. No, wait. Sir? Have I hurt your feelings? Have I saddened you? Because I didn't mean. There can be respect, you know. There can be affection, noblesse oblige. So come on, Mills. Bear up. Carry on. We'll get back on our horses and... What is it? You've doomed me, Mills said. You've cursed my race. It was so. Mills apologized silently to the sons he was yet to have, if they ever got out of this mess, for the heritage he was yet to give them, grieved for the millness he was doomed to pass on, for the frayed, flawed genes he thought blood, of the second-rate, backseat, low-down life, for seeing, if he ever got out of this mess, a continuum of the less than average, of the small-time, poached, horseshit man life, prophesying right there in what Guillalum himself had told him could not have been horseland, all the consequences to others in the burdened bestiality of his black-balled loins.
In a big sprawling story like George Mills, where there are lots of stories within the stories, it's about stories itself, where the prose itself is a lot of what it's about. How do you know when to stop a novel like this? I mean, couldn't you just keep on telling stories? Couldn't George Mills just go on and on and on?
Only if I had invented more George Millses. I know when to stop when it's over, and it was over at the last line on the last page. I think that plot situations proceed logically, and that a writer in a kind of way is almost like a lawyer doing a brief. He knows what witnesses in the form of characters to call, and he knows, I suppose, what points he wants to make to find his client ultimately innocent, as I find my client in George Mills.
But you do have, like, sort of rolling stories. I mean, were there more stories that you had on that you edited out, or do you know beforehand exactly what you want to do?
It seems to me that no writer who is any good knows beforehand exactly what he wants to do. Faulkner was fond of saying that some sort of unconsciousness took over and ran away with the book. I don't think that that's so. Although I believe the writer is in control. His imagination quite frequently opens windows through which he can see other sorts of possibilities. And he follows those possibilities until they play out. And again, I mean, I'm repeating myself, but the imagination is ultimately logical and tells you where to go. It's not the unconscious which tells you where to go. It's not the unconscious, which is in fact logical, but the imagination.
But your imagination, it seems to hit with such freshness. You know, these light bulbs popping up. You get to the end of a chapter and suddenly George Mills says, "I'm saved," and it hits him. Does that sort of, those narrative twists or inventions, does that come to you while you're writing, or is that something that you plan out again beforehand?
No, it doesn't come. It's not something that I plan out beforehand. It comes to me while I'm writing. But what you're talking about are major premises, and in a real way, I mean, when it occurs to George Mills that I'm saved, that he's saved, what he's really saying is, "My God, Louise, his wife, leave me alone. I don't want to have anything more to do with life. Nothing more can happen to me." And it's that sort of sense of grace that he has in this book. He doesn't believe that God has saved him. He believes that his character has saved him. He believes he's tapped out and that he's at the end of his road and the end of his line, and nothing either good nor bad can happen to him, that he's out of harm's way, out of reach. And in that sense, he's saved. And now that's, sort of a major premise of the book. But when he says it, it occurs to him as spontaneously as it occurs to me. And it occurs to him simply because his wife is doing all sort of acrobatics on the floor and making sexual invitations, and he's just too tired. It's like saying, "I've got a headache."
You do a lot of cross-cutting and sort of side stories. Does interrupting the forward action concern you?
No, or I wouldn't do it. I regard that as pacing, not interrupting the forward action.
All right. When I was a freshman, my father owns a butcher store, or did own one in Brooklyn, and I used to work there. And when I was a freshman in college, in 1973, I read Criers and Kibitzers, which is in the Norton Introduction to Literature, and I was struck by the truth of the mentality of the people in those situations, and the workers, the Criers and Kibitzers. What's your interest in the working class? I mean, you've got this everyman George Mills, your characters in The Living End, your other characters. It's very blue-collar, working class.
Well, the characters in The Living End are not blue-collar characters. Ellerby owns a liquor store. I mean, his murderer is, unless you consider killing blue-collar work.
All right, not blue-collar, then workers, that store owners, businessmen, small businessmen, that
all right.
class.
Actually, vocation essentially becomes my metaphor. I've written about 8 books, and most of them are about, or at least start with the idea of a particularly, as far as I'm concerned, oblique vocation. My first novel, Boswell, was about a professional wrestler. Wrestling became a kind of metaphor for striving. I wrote a novel which is about an itinerant radio man. The Dick Gibson Show, and that became a metaphor for voice, which is itself a metaphor for language. Another novel was about a bail bondsman. The trade there was bail bondery. And the natural metaphor, it seems to me, though I didn't know this when I began to write it, is a bail bondsman is a man who gives other people their freedom or decides not to give other people their freedom. So the bail bondsman, in a sort of way, becomes a metaphor for a secular god. Also a metaphor for mystery, because that's what that book is all about. And so on and so forth through most of the, so my interest is not in trade per se, or little man or big man or what have you, but in what a man is not what he eats, a man is what he does. On the other hand, short stories, which I no longer write, come to me all together all at once, and vocation plays less part in them.